Uh, Today is September 22nd, 2020. The time is now 5:05 p.m. On behalf of the Board of Education, good evening, everyone. I hope everyone is safe and doing well. We're starting a little bit early today. You were probably expecting, if you're tuning in now, expecting to see the Board of Education at 5:30 to do our special meeting. But in advance of that, on occasion, sometimes we have to schedule public hearings because they're required by law. And so you just probably see me today because I'm the person charged with the responsibility of conducting this particular hearing. And this particular hearing is about the school district's safety plan, district-wide safety plan. So to make sure that I cover every aspect of my responsibility in describing what this is about, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to read this thing, which is a script that somebody wrote for me, because I want to make sure that I am compliant with the law. So don't take it personally. Just got to make sure I say what they tell me I'm supposed to say by law. So here goes. The Rochester City School District is committed to the safety and preparedness of its students, staff, and its visitors. That is very much true. Script or no script. Education Law 8, Section 155.17 requires the Board of Education to adopt a comprehensive district-wide school safety plan and a building-level emergency response plans regarding crisis intervention and emergency response and management. Our district-wide school safety plan is an all-hazards approach to crisis management and focuses on mitigation, prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery procedures. The district-wide school safety plan is implemented at the time of an emergency at the direction of the superintendent, or his or her designee. Incident commanders, as they're called, which are usually school principals, will implement building emergency response plans when directed by the respective school chiefs, deputy superintendent, or the chief of operations. In the absence of direction from a senior administration official, each building incident commander is authorized and directed to implement this plan or take any other action as may be necessary in his or her judgment in order to save lives or mitigate the effects of a particular emergency or crisis. A copy of the district-wide safety plan is available on the district's website, which of course you know is https://www.rcsdk12.org/safety plan. The 30-day public comment period has now concluded for the district-wide school safety plan. Although no written comments were received for this particular hearing, this hearing is an opportunity while no written comments have been received, this hearing is an opportunity for any final comments on the plan itself. The Board of Education will consider a resolution to accept the district-wide safety plan on this Thursday, September the 24th, 2020, at our regularly scheduled board business meeting. That concludes this hearing. We hope to see you all at our 5:30 meeting, which is in about 21 minutes. God bless, and have a safe night if you choose not to join us. our meeting. Good evening, everyone. Let me adjust my laptop. Today is September the 22nd, 2020. Time is 5:33. Good evening. On behalf of the Board of Education, we hope and pray that everybody is well and safe. And we realize, however, that that was not the case for some of our citizens in this community over the last week or so. And in fact, what happened in our community is sadly not a new or unique headline. Perhaps it is for us, but not for others. And we see violence manifesting itself as members of Board of Education in other ways, not just in mass incidences like what we saw this past week. So as usual, we would begin our meeting in quiet reflection for those that have suffered the unspeakable. Specifically, I would call names of Ms. Young, who attended East High School, and Mr. Alexander, who attended UPrep. You know, when these sorts of things happen, as colleagues, my colleagues and I understand that there is no charter schools and traditional public schools. These are all students. These are all sons and daughters, aunts and uncles, cousins, and their loss crosses all color lines, all social economic lines. And when these types of things happen, we as a board try to dedicate not only our service to improving and preventing these kinds of things from happening, but in the moments that we can, in meetings such as this, we try to set aside some time, again, in quiet reflection. So in memory of Ms. Young and Mr. Alexander, we ask that you share this quiet moment as we reflect on their lives and our community's loss as a consequence of their passing. Thank you for sharing that moment with my colleagues and I. Next order of business is a speakers list. Now, normally we would have people speaking, but just so happens tonight, our staff has told us that there are no speakers and no one submitted anything in writing. So, but I would ask our clerk to remind you as best she can, what an individual would have to do if they wanted to speak up at a future board meeting or send a submission. Ms. Wade?
Certainly. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the board meeting. If you would like to submit comments or would like to speak at a Board of Education meeting, we invite you to visit our website where you can review the details there. Or if you already have and want to continue doing so, you know that you can email us at boardofeducation@rcsdk12.org and submit your request for speaking or submit your public comments. The board members will receive your comments and comments will be posted to the website for review as well. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Wade. We appreciate that. All right, next item on the agenda, I think is your agenda item as well, Ms. Wade. You want to go ahead and discuss with us the update on the monitor's legislative requirements?
Sure, and I invite our district monitor, Dr. Shelley Jallow, to join in if there are any questions and things to this presentation. It really is just an update. Dr. Jallow has come before us a couple of times to discuss the requirements and things that we are doing as she has been appointed to the district. So I'm sharing the screen to show with you some of the legislative requirements that have been completed. As you know, the board, in consultation with the monitor, was tasked with updating our conflict of interest policy. That policy has been subsequently updated and was amended and put into place on August 27th. That was our last month and can now be found now on the website. The next things that were tasked were also for her to have a have 3 public hearings within 60 days of appointment, and we had those. There was one on the statutory regulations authorization, and then we also had a public hearing on July 8th regarding academic performance, and one on July 22nd regarding fiscal performance. The upcoming requirements are for the board and superintendent to collaborate on development of a financial plan, which should be done before November 1st, and also a academic plan before September 1st as well. And so we are in the process of developing, I know that Dr. Jallow is in the process of developing that plan, and information will be shared as it becomes available. We'll also be planning to roll out the district's budget ahead of our regular timeline. And so the budget is being developed to have events push up this year. The ongoing requirements of the legislation also mention semi-annual reports on the academic, fiscal, and operational status of the district, and to assist in resolving disputes or conflicts between the board and superintendent, approval of travel outside the state, recommendation of cost-saving measures as the board is that have been coming through from Dr. Jallow, as well as to notify the board in regards to violations to the academic plan and financial plan as they have been developed. Just want to let the board know, and for our listeners, that these are the upcoming dates that relate to these requirements. On October 15th will be one of the deadlines for quarterly submission to NYSET, and Dr. Jallow can speak to this further, but we are anticipating that coming up soon. We have also slated October 21st and October 28th for the forums related to the academic plan. That's also supposed to say fiscal plan. I apologize for the typo there. But we also will be releasing the budget calendar dates that will be under consideration as well. And that will be done in the next finance committee meeting in October. If there are any questions, Dr. Jallow and I are available for questions.
I'm looking and I don't see any. Doesn't seem like there are any questions. I do have a comment though. Kaya, I actually kind of like the calendar that you described for the monitors and upcoming events related to that. It might be good, I don't know what my colleagues think about this, if as part of your presentation during at least business meetings, if you summarized, perhaps with the assistance of with Francine, upcoming events for the district. In other words, where people are signed on and watching, they have the calendar that we print. But I think if we had a segment just telling people different things that were coming up, maybe some highlights, not a lot, but as clerk, you might be in a better position than most of us to describe that kind of thing. There might be some things that are not necessarily academic, but they may be recreational. Maybe think about doing something like that, because as you were reading it, I thought, man, that's a great opportunity for people who are tuning in to see what's going to be happening with respect to the monitor, but we might consider doing something like that more globally. So think about that. I don't know if anybody has any response to that idea. And I'm not talking about, a 10-minute presentation. I'm talking about a minute or two, PowerPoint, boom, 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 this happened in this date. You might want to go to this thing. So
we will take it into advisement and try and something back to the next business meeting.
I appreciate that. Anybody else have any comments or questions? All right, then the next item on the agenda is I turn the gavel over to Vice President Elliott for the HR committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, everybody. The HR committee will have a presentation of the staffing during this time of the pandemic and just where we are given this pandemic around our staffing issues, our staffing needs, our staffing challenges. We really do have to, and the superintendent is working on, unfortunately, we have to do, a lot of downsizing. There's just not a lot of work for a lot of our staff. and no fault of our own. It's just the environment in which we're living in right now. And just want to say to the superintendent and to the acting HR chief, we appreciate the work that you all are doing. No, it's tough, but it is the time that we're living in. These are difficult times, no question about it. We're trying to do the best that we can, but our best is never going to be enough during this time. And so, unfortunately, we're going to have to take the hits from a number of our staff, but we have to make the decisions that are in best with the financial position of our district. And so we've asked Steve Carlin, who's the acting chief of HR, to provide us with the presentation of what our district will look like around staffing needs and the associated financial expenses that are connected with staffing. So Steve, I'll turn it over to you for the presentation, and thank you so much.
Yep, thank you, Vice President Elliott. Allie's going to put the presentation up for me. So just a quick outline. We're going to talk about where we are with staffing expenses since the closure on March 14th, when we had to close down for COVID, and continuing on through to the first day of school for kids. We're going to talk about some staffing levels, how those have adjusted, what some of the expenses have looked like since that time, savings and leave usage and substitutes, but also where we anticipate seeing staffing and expenses going as far as trends. And obviously some of this is just us trying to do our best guessing, but it's based on some analysis, some conversations with with colleagues and others in the professional line as far as what they're seeing in trend analysis as well. So we start out with staffing, then at that point in time versus the first day of school. As you'll see, Azar has had a reduction of 36 positions since March for a 9.4% decrease. RTA had a reduction of 333, and Bente has a reduction of 6. However, there are an additional 213 layoffs that are coming to the board in 2 nights, which are associated mainly with food service and school safety officers. When you put those in the mix, it's 219, which is a 16% reduction. RAP, the number is relatively small. It looks like it's 21, but we did furlough 113 paraprofessionals effective on August 30th. That number actually counts as leave, so it doesn't show up as an abolition, but it is in fact operationally a reduction in staff of 113 when combined with the 21 that were already reduced. It's 134 reduction since that point. So an overall total of 396 staff members. As far as being at this point in time, actual abolitions, and then you put in the other 2 numbers. Some important notes. A large portion of the administrators, all the administrators, and the teaching positions were a result of budget closures, not necessarily due to COVID, but it is significant to note where we are since that period of time, and as to whether or not any further would be needed will continually be assessed. On August 27th, we found out that there had to be a significant reduction in pre-K, in part because the grant was reduced significantly, and also because we were informed by New York State that should we be in a fully remote environment, they would not fund any of the paraprofessionals that were as part of that unit. Therefore, that caused what would have to be a RIF of 113 paraprofessionals. We negotiated with the union that represents those paraprofessionals for a furlough instead, but it was a reduction of 113 across the entire paraprofessional unit. So even though the pre-K positions were the ones reduced, we have to do a seniority-based layoff. So it was felt across virtually every school in the district. At the same time, we also had to reduce 22 elementary teachers because the pre-K attendance numbers were low enough. and 2 adult family educators. Those were uniquely pre-K positions.
Hey, Steve, before you go to the next page, can you just explain what furloughed is?
Sure. So a furlough is an unpaid leave of absence, but entitles the employee to continue to have access to benefits such as health insurance, as long as they continue to make their payments for it. So we negotiated a memorandum of agreement with the unit so that they could have a furlough of their employees. Otherwise, we would have had to do a layoff, because under the law, we can't decide to furlough somebody. We can only negotiate for a furlough. However, we always have the right to abolish positions and create layoffs.
Now, will they be entitled to unemployment benefits?
They are entitled to unemployment because they're receiving no salary from us. And they are also, we've made a promise that when we, if we go back to either a hybrid or an in-person instruction, that those furloughed employees, they're subject to recall the same as a layoff, so they're recalled in seniority order. But we're also have made a pledge to try, to the greatest extent possible, to put them directly back in the same classrooms from which they left. So
thank you.
Yeah. And then on September 1st, after a further culling of the data, we did not have the increase in kindergarten enrollment that we expected. It's a funny trend with the kindergarten enrollments. We actually see it, a great number of the parents sign the kids up for kindergarten in August. So when we have our staffing numbers in July, they are almost always under what the total enrollment is. So we staff to what the projections are. And this year, I think due to COVID, a great number of parents just never signed their kids up for kindergarten. And so out of fiscal responsibility, we decided to close an additional 10 classrooms and consolidate those rooms, leading to an additional 10 elementary teachers being laid off across the district as of September 1. So time we were considering what the impact was going to have to be if we're fully remote on a number of employees that really can't do their jobs remotely, such as school safety officers and food service workers. The food service workers present an interesting problem because the entire funding for food service, with the exception of a few percent, comes from the lunch aid fund, which is built on a model of how many meals are served per day. And so we project out 2 meals per student per day. And the number is somewhere up north of 50,000 meals per day. However, when we are doing the food that we distribute out to the community, we're serving a fraction of that amount. And so at the end of the year, when we go to get reimbursed, we will have a very low reimbursement number versus projection. And since the entire budget for food service is really built on those grant funds, the food service team got together and decided that the minimum number they could keep to keep the food being distributed to the centers and to the schools versus what we actually had would result in 164 food service workers having to be laid off. In addition, after looking at what schools were going to be open and reallocating staff as best we could, they determined that they needed to reduce the school safety officer unit by close to 90, but there were also about 40 vacancies at the time. And so when we consolidated the positions, it ended up resulting in 49 school safety officers being subject to layoff. Those layoffs are going to be effective on October 16th, and they're up for vote on September 24th before this board. The possible additional reductions or layoffs.
Madam Vice President, can I ask a question?
Yes, Mr. President.
All right,
please.
thank you. You said there were already 40 vacancies in the school safety officers.
Yes.
That's an incredible number of vacancies, unless I'm missing something. And you don't have to get into a long discussion of it now, but most people probably heard that and think, wow, it was almost half of the number. Mm-hmm. Is that, and again, if you can't answer this now, it's fine. Is that unusual? Is that seasonal? It just seems like an incredible number of vacancies. And by the way, the background to this is, I don't know when we stop having resource officers in our buildings, but I hope it wasn't around this kind of environment. What's the deal with that?
So in part, these vacancies were created because of when we decided not to have school resource officers. To compensate for that, we added a large number of school safety officer positions. However, we were not able to fill those. I see. 41 vacancies is high for the SSOs, but it is something that we typically run a vacancy count on the SSOs just because it's a more transient
Sure.
type situation with those positions. But when we tried to add a lot, we knew that we likely would not be able to fill them with permanents right away. So we use subs and there's overtime and things like that depending on different units. So it does seem like a somewhat inflated number, but it is because of the collision of timing between the
Sure.
SROs being reduced and the hiring over the summer, and it all came together. But as far as an overall impact on the unit, when we decided to close the large number of SSOs for the time being, at least, it did result in a lower number of overall people being laid off because we were able to consolidate the vacancies that were there. And part of what was done was generally elementary schools do not have a school safety officer. Traditionally, a small percentage do, but since they all are allowing parents to come in and they needed people to do temp checks, one of the things that they did was redistribute at least one SSO to each elementary site in an attempt to try and keep some of the unit and have work for them that was, that was useful, that they need somebody at the door, temperature checking, signing in, logging in, things like that. But it was still ended up being a pretty big reduction since there are no students coming into the buildings at all.
So just as a follow-up, and again, I don't need an answer for this now, assuming hypothetically we go back into session in 7 weeks or however many weeks is left, I would like to know, and I don't know if, Madam Vice President, if we could do this at another HR meeting, might have to be sooner. What is going to be the plan for making sure if hypothetically we open back up, since we don't have SROs in our schools, are we going to be able to ramp up a sufficient capacity of school safety officers? I'm concerned about that. And are we working on getting those positions filled now? Are we interviewing people? Are we trying to avoid? All these questions can be answered later, but this is a major concern. And I don't want us to not, obviously we wouldn't do this. I wouldn't want us to not go back into session because we don't have ample staff, but that's a large number, and no one would want to fill these slots with people who are subs. So I would like at a future point some update on what the plan is. Since we don't have school resource officers, what are we going to have? Should the schools reopen? What's the plan? But again, I'll wait for that answer.
I made a note. I'll obviously have to circle back around with the Office of Safety and Security and Mike Schmidt and find out. And part of this is also, you have to have a specific security guard license now, which is a relatively new requirement past few years. So sometimes even if we select somebody to be a sub, we're still trying to work to get them their licensure so that they can become permanent. But I'll certainly circle back around. I don't have an answer at this point, but good
Thank you.
question. So one final thing in the slide. Certainly we're doing a continued review of the need for support staff for those positions that can't be performed remotely or for buildings that we're projecting to be overstaffed due to low enrollment. So depending on how long the fully remote instruction model lasts, we may have to revisit the notion of layoffs across different units. Okay, so the next thing I was asked to look at was what type of impact the COVID shutdown has had on our health insurance. And the initial piece of this is actually relatively positive in terms of fiscal impact. Between January and July of this year, our self-insured health insurance costs were down approximately $6.28 million, which is a very real number for us. The problem is that we have to be very cautious about the sustainability of these savings. We know that during the period of March through summer 2020, depending on the facility, they suspended service to really most but emergency services. And this especially is true of surgeries, which tend to have a very high cost for us as a self-insured plan. These are resuming, and we expect expenses will normalize. And so while that may still not ever bump all the way up, what's more scary is what's the next bullet point, is that due to either restrictions on people's ability to be transported places or their fear of going to medical facilities, we're learning that a lot of people were foregoing their preventative care, such as for pre-existing conditions of diabetes, heart conditions, breathing disorders. And when you do that, when you ultimately end up in a crisis, it is a significant event as opposed to a routine event, which costs us a lot more money. We're going to see more, we expect to see a lot more urgent care visits. We expect to see a lot more hospitalizations resulting from things like that. And this is a trend that we're hearing from our broker and just from industry chatter, that this is a very real potential threat, and so we need to be very cautious in keeping our reserves in the health insurance line for those eventualities. And also a COVID vaccine, which we all hope is coming very soon, is likely going to be expensive because it's going to be a first on the market type of thing. But to ensure that the maximum number of people use it, it's very likely that there's going to be a requirement that health insurance plans provide it at little or no copay. And when you're self-insured, that means that you have to eat the entire expense. And so that certainly is an unanticipated expense that we expect at some point to have to take on, that we wouldn't have ever seen in January when we were budgeting, for example. And then finally, the long-term effects of COVID on pregnant women is starting to be something that we're hearing a little bit about, and people with other conditions that would be previously unforeseeable. Again, when we're looking at our, when we ask people in the fall, we get our projections as far as what our cost should be. All of this was not on the radar. So we have to be cautious as far as as to whether or not those projected savings will continue at this rate. But for the moment, at least, we are under our projected costs, and that is a real impact directly from the COVID shutdowns. Leaves. So as most people know, there were a couple of different federal leaves that were enacted in response to this. There was an extension of the Family Medical Leave Act, which provided additional benefits. Instead of, the FMLA has always been an unpaid leave benefit. However, when COVID hit, the federal government passed two different leave standards that allowed for pay, either full pay or 2/3 pay. And so the first was the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which provides leave for childcare. So if you're in a situation where your children are home from school because their school is closed, then you're entitled to take 10 weeks of paid leave. This was recently clarified to include if your child's in a hybrid learning environment, for those days when the child is not in school, you are entitled to take intermittent leave. Now, we've seen 10 leaves taken so far, which seems like a very low number, given the size of our workforce of close to 6,000. But none of these were teachers, because we are in a fully remote environment right now. So we certainly would anticipate that if we return to a hybrid or an in-person instructional environment, that this number would trend up significantly. So the few that we saw were those food service workers, for example, or clerical staff who were being asked to come in and who had their kids home because their schools were closed. So it's a pretty small number. The rest of the leaves were the quarantine leaves. These are available for either confirmed COVID symptoms, suspected exposure, or traveling to a restricted state, and that's for up to 14 days, or excuse me, 10 work days of quarantine leave is available for you, as long as it's required by the Department of Health, and those are also paid leaves. So certainly, even if we remain in a remote environment, we're expecting to see an increase in the need for quarantine-related leaves because, one, we have people who are still coming in person and required to be here, so they'd be eligible to take it, but we're also expecting to see employees who couldn't perform their work remotely, even teachers, for example, if they get sick, and are going to need to start taking leaves, use of illness and such. If we return to a hybrid or in person, certainly this is going to be a significant trend we're going to be looking at, especially as cold and flu season approaches. We're not going to know what the symptoms are so close. We're not going to know whether it's COVID or whether it's a typical cold. We're going to have to err on the side of people get to stay home, and that's a paid situation that, again, we did not necessarily anticipate when we build our budget when this all starts.
And so, Steve, I'm also hearing the month of December, something about that month where the cases are supposed to rise significantly. I don't know exactly why that month, but I'm hearing around that. So that may be something for us to keep watch on, what may happen in December if there's going to be a significant spike in COVID-related diseases. So
I'm hearing similar, Vice President Elliott, and I think that the major reason I'm understanding for that is, as it gets colder and people are forced back inside, as opposed to being able to enjoy a meal out on a patio, you're now having to make a choice between going inside, or kids are forced to play inside or outside. I think the more the more people are together inside, the more likely the spread is. And so it seems inevitably, and for us, December is really that first guaranteed month where you can't do a whole lot outside.
Mhm.
Next slide. Thank you. So a significant question certainly arose around substitutes. As you all know, our sub usage was trending up significantly year over year. It really hit its apex in 2019 when we were looking at about $1.5 million in instructional sub usage per month. There were controls put in place in 19. Harry Kennedy and Maurice Snipe did a good job of starting to put controls in place for ensuring that subs can only be called in certain situations and looking at what a true vacancy was and things like that. So we were starting to see a downward trend to begin with in 2020. It had dropped down the 1.0 million per month. Was already starting to trend down, but on the next slide, you'll see that we certainly saw with COVID a significant downward departure. So you'll see November, December, January, we're hovering in the 1.2, 1.3. February 1.0 was actually, February is always a lower because there's a less number of days, less number of school days. March was holding at 1.2, still again, well under the 1.5 average, but then COVID, we get to April, we get to May, we're in the 800,000, 900,000, 800,000, and then June, 585. A lot of people wondered why we didn't just drop right off the edge in April and May, but it's because we were in a 2-week holding pattern consistently. And so we have a lot of long-term subs in the district that are filling for vacancies that we just can't get certified teachers for. So they certainly were being part of this. And then we were using our per diem subs to help for teachers who were out or home with their own kids. We're keeping the per diems. It was a very rocky time where nobody knew whether we were going to reopen the next week. Every week we're just waiting for Cuomo, as you remember. And so it became so finally in June when we got the shutdown order, you saw the sub usage trend right down. And then if you on the next slide, you'll see since we've reopened, we've seen this is the lowest we would ever hope to see. So we're at substitute usage is down 71% from the same time last period. We hit our high water mark on Friday at 100 being used, which compared to our normal data is just absolutely incredible. And we are using no administrative subs at this point. We have one principal who's out and the assistant principal is filling in instead. So on the next slide, I try and talk about a little bit about what we're looking at. So why we have any subs at all is a question everybody likes to ask, but of course, a lot of our current sub usage that we're using right now is filling for teaching positions such as bilingual, certain high school science areas, some tech areas where we just can't get a certified teacher. So we can't put somebody who's not certified into a bona fide vacancy. We have to call them a sub. And so that's where most of that sub usage is. We have a small number of people being used as substitutes for teachers who were out for some reason. And the relatively small number of other subs, we developed a sub pool internally. So what we did was with the layoffs from last year, we have a list of people on what's called a PEL, a preferred eligibility list. We took the most senior teachers from a couple of different areas and we pushed them through our 4-day professional development that happened with the superintendent's conference days so that they would be fully integrated into our remote learning environment so that and there are first line subs to be called now. So if a person has to, gets ill and has to go out or has an emergency, as happens with a workforce our size, we will have people who are ready, trained, ready to step in and also certified teachers, which is better for the kids. Also, we are continuing to see weekly retirements and resignations from teachers. Some just don't want to do the remote environment. And so when they leave, we need to pull people off of this preferred eligibility list to fill their spots. And we now have a group of teachers who are already trained. We don't have to spend time getting them up to speed on what we're doing. We're actually starting to exhaust that list. So we're going to refill that list with another. Maurice is working on pulling another, I believe, 20 teachers back up. And we're going to get them trained up and ready to go in the same way. And this has been a pretty good dynamic between HR and the school chiefs of developing this program and getting the principals to use it. So we're hopeful that continues to go well. So we're certainly going to anticipate some increase in teacher subs. It's not going to stay at 100 necessarily as the school year goes along. As I said, resignations, retirements, there's a gap. When somebody retires, we have a little bit of a gap. We need to use a sub to fill in between when we get them board appointed versus when the vacancy is created sometimes. But there's also people who are just going to become ill enough that they just can't teach at all. The school chiefs and the building committees have developed plans to reduce the needs for subs for any absence of 3 days or less between a combination of asynchronous instruction and the building subs. So that should help reduce the sub usage as well. But to the extent somebody's out for 5 days or 10 days, they have to travel, for an ill parent or something, we do have this pool of subs. So we will see some sub usage. But it is going to be, significantly down from what we were looking at in the past. So, and again, if we return to a hybrid or fully in person, we'll certainly see probably a sharper increase in sub usage. It may be up back to its normal level just because of the availability of these paid leaves that were never there before. And so if your kid's in a hybrid, instruction model, you have an illness of your own that you can't be in a COVID sensitive environment, we're expecting to see some big upticks in that potentially. So, and with a population of our size, it's the number is going to be a big number, unfortunately. So, and I think that is the end of my presentation, but I'm happy to take questions and talk through anything with you guys.
Thank you, Steve. I do just have one question. I was reading the onboard magazine or newspaper for boards of education, and it talked about the ERS rate is to rise, and that's for our non-instructional employees.
Right.
So it's supposed to rise from 14.6% to 16.2%. So how does that impact us in terms of our budget situation at this point? And I guess the next question is that if we have downsized the number of the those employees in that group that is non-instructional employees, then could it be a wash, or could it be close to a wash if we've downsized some of those employees at this point? How do you respond to that, Steve?
Well, I think you've caught me off guard here, Commissioner. The ERS contribution rate stuff actually comes in through finance, and I have the latest edition of Onboard on my desk, but I have not read it because it's a work day and I haven't gotten to it yet. I will say that I can't give you a good answer to that at the moment, but certainly between me and Carlene, we can probably come up with an impact statement on that point. Is it the contribution rate that's going to rise? That's what you're saying? Like our requirement for how much?
Yeah, employer contribution rate.
Okay, yeah, that's going to be a budget. That's going to be a budget question, and I don't know when it kicks in. So it will certainly have some kind of an increase, no doubt. The number of ERS employees that we are talking about laying off is probably not going to be a significant enough number to offset what that percentage increases across the unit. But I will again, before I talk anymore, in a vacuum, I'll certainly let. I see Carlene came on screen. I think she's here to save me, so I'm gonna stop talking for a minute.
We were made aware of the increase as well, and we are doing that calculation, Commissioner Elliott. So I'll have more information probably at the next finance meeting, but we'll bring you up to speed with that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from my colleagues? I don't see any hands raised. Commissioner LeBron?
Actually, Commissioner Powell had her hand up first, so I'll concede the floor to her and go after her.
I apologize, Commissioner.
Okay.
Commissioner Powell?
Thank you so much. I noticed that the reports on new COVID cases in Monroe County had dropped to 0 today or yesterday. And so it strikes me that we could be very close to having to restart in-person learning because we won't be able to justify remote learning if there are no new cases in the county. How ready are we to flip that switch?
Leslie just came on, so Madam Superintendent.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell, for that question. So we were ready to open under our hybrid model of having pre-K through 4 and a particular set of students and with disabilities. So what we have to look at over the next couple of weeks is that the same model that we're going to go with, while we're looking though at certainly our suburban counterparts, just how their hybrid models, as well as the other big 5 and districts in the Council for Great City Schools. So I would say that we're ready if we go back to that same model, but we need to determine, is that the right model to go back to in 10 weeks?
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. Thank you for the question, Commissioner Powell. Commissioner LeBron?
Thank you. Excuse me, I had several questions, but I was holding off to the end of the presentation. So on the first slide, when you talked about the FTEs and the vacancies, I personally would like to see those numbers separated because I want to understand who is an actual person that we might be abolishing versus a vacancy. Because when I saw that, I know that we have some resolutions for this Thursday's business meeting with lots of names on there. And so then it leads me to question, if we have vacancies, why wouldn't we figure out a way in the same departments and units to retain individuals if there's a vacancy that needs to be filled? So I just say that because it was a little bit confusing. So in the future, to review this data, I would like to see the FTEs and the vacancies so that we know exactly whether we are laying off an individual or just eliminating a vacant position. And then also, if this could be, and I don't know if this is going to be a ongoing presentation. I do know that one of the state auditors' final findings was that we should monitor these numbers, particularly because there's a number where we may be off balance in what we budgeted for FTEs. So I assume that this was tied into that. I could be wrong, but I would like to also see our student ratio staffing numbers, because I know that we are going to be laying off a lot of people, but we're still employing a lot of people as well. And so I still would like to understand what our ratio is and what the potential impact to that number could be in the future. I just wanted to clarify the 113 for pre-K for our RAP members, that the seniority clause is what took an effect, which is why there was a ripple effect with RAP members and TAs and paras across the district.
Yeah, it was only paras, but yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And then
it's not the seniority clause in their contract. It's the seniority clause in the civil service law. That's
the law. We're required to, and unfortunately, it was pre-K that didn't get funded, but other people were impacted even though they did not work in pre-K themselves because of the seniority clause. The safety plan, I know that President White mentioned it, but that's actually an area I would love for this board to reconsider and reevaluate. So I do know that we remove SROs, a celebration where some of us are still celebrating that on this board. And I do know that the previous superintendent that left, his plan was to increase SSOs. And so I would like us to actually reevaluate that plan, especially if there were vacancies, we didn't even fill them, and see how we can, I hate to say reimagine it, but I think the time now is the time to reevaluate how we provide student safety in school settings. And I want to reiterate that our students and our children are not criminals, and they should absolutely not be treated as such on school grounds, and figure out ways of how we can use the funding that was originally intentionally there to increase SSOs, to figure out how we can actually increase student supports, particularly counseling and social work. And I'm going to throw out community health workers out there. I know we don't have any in the district, but there's just something to consider, but some more supports for them. You mentioned in the health insurance, the savings from the 1920 budget that we have left over from health insurance. And I just want to ask if that funding is part of the 2021 budget now, that small little surplus and savings, and if that is being guarded and reserved for the expenditures we know are coming down the pipeline for this budget year related to health insurance. That's
I'll certainly defer to Carlene on that point. I'll note, I said between January 2020, the way we get our breakdowns from our broker is they run a calendar year for us because that's how the health insurance renewals come in. So yeah, we had a 6.28 million. We don't see some of those savings until after the new fiscal year. For example, July 2020, we don't even know those numbers until late August or early September because of the claims runoffs. And so this does cross that fiscal year, but Carlene, again, I'll defer to you.
Well, that's my understanding as well, Steve, is that there's a crossover in the fiscal years. And so that makes it a little bit more challenging. I think one of the greatest areas that we had to focus in on this particular year was just to make sure that our health insurance reserve was back up to a healthy level. And so we're focusing in on that. But Commissioner LeBron, I'll be happy to, again, have all of that data available for the Finance Committee meeting. It's not a problem.
Yes, thank you. And then in substitutes, and maybe this is for you too, Carlene, so you can stay here. So even with what was presented, I just did a very rough calculation. And the average was like 1.2 million that we were spending on average per month, except that 1 month we had 1.3 million. But this is pre-COVID. We were spending 1.2 million average per month. And if I calculated that by 12 months, or even 10 months, we are looking between the 15 and $18 million range. And so I say that because I know that that's a line that we under budgeted and that was flagged before for having done so. And I heard you saying that there were some controls starting to be put in place, but I've heard that before and I have not seen the results of those controls. So I just want to caution everyone, the entire school board, the administrators, to understand that once we do go back, whether it's a hybrid model or fully in person, and knowing everything that's occurring right now with COVID, that budget item line may end up going over, even with controls. Like, we have to monitor that piece. But for me, even though you presented what appears to be savings, it's not a true savings to me, knowing that we under budgeted in the first place. So I just say that with caution because of the numbers that were presented. Because when I first read it, I was like, oh, this looks great. But then as I dug deeper, I do recall that is the line that the state auditors have warned us about, and that it was a highlighted area of under budgeting from the external auditors for last year as well.
So to Commissioner LeBron's point, Carlene or Steve, given that we're not using that line item as much now, Commissioner LeBron, help me on this one. Are we able to balance that out, given the fact that we're not going to be spending as much on substitutes? Will we how do I say this? Well, we won't be spending, but will that add to our budget line, or does that? Am I not asking the correct question on that? Because to Commissioner LeBron's point, yep, we under budgeted, and I don't know what the budget line item is for us now, but will that some way wash itself out, for lack of better terminology? In other words, will we benefit from the reduction in substitutes at this point to sort of balance that where we had under budgeted previously? Is that not a good question?
I think it's a good question, Commissioner Vice President Elliott. I think what you're asking is, well, it balances itself out because we were under budgeted and now
And we're not using as many
have the
substitutes.
savings right
Yeah.
up front because of COVID, and then we may see an increase, but we have no idea what that increase may look like, because I do believe part of what Steve presented tonight is that it is also a warning that we don't know what substitute usage is going to look like when we do go back, whether it's hybrid or fully in person in a COVID world. We have no idea. And people do have rights under new regulations to take family medical leave and not have to work. And we don't, I think there's some things there. I'm glad that it's on their radar though, and that we're having this conversation, because we can always go back to it later on and say we had this conversation, that there are some controls that are being put into place and some different usages of staffing, so that we're not just fully depending on this notion of just getting a sub without thinking outside of the box of how to manage when there might be opening. But I'll let Steve answer too.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know Commissioner Powell has her hand up, but does somebody want to react to what we've just said before Commissioner Powell ask a question?
Sure. Steve, do you want to go ahead, or you want me to take it?
Well, I mean, I think we can each take a piece of this. I mean, certainly I can say that we are continuing to try and exercise as much discipline on the sub usage that you're right. It was trending at about 1.2 million. We ended the year last year at, I think, 11.4 million in sub usage, which brought us in under budget. But really, quite frankly, looking back and being honest, only because we got lucky for April, May, and June that the sub usage went down due to COVID. Otherwise, we would have been over budget. There's no question. So, you know, the lesson learned on this side. But as I did try and note, we also brought the line from 1.5 per month down to 1.2 with just a few months of shifting and you know, discipline. Hopefully, we can learn more from that. Also, we've closed 224 classroom positions over the budget, so that will naturally trend to less sub usage to begin with. But so I can say I hope that we do not see numbers like 1.2 million in sub usage, but also if we return to a fully in-person instruction with the available leaves, we could be jumping up higher than even I would hope with the controls we have in place. As to the savings we're generating right now versus how those are going to play out over the course of the year, and whether that's going to give us some monies that we can grab up and help offset a different deficit, I'll defer to Carlene on that point.
Right. So one of the areas that Harry had mentioned within his presentation was where we were bringing in substitutes simply to fill in vacancies that were listed within the staffing templates within the buildings and departments, but the teaching position was actually not filled at that point in time. So whether it was just to have an extra set of hands or whatever, that's where that substitute was being used. If we do not follow that practice, if we use a practice that is more disciplined and only fill the positions that need to be filled, that's where we're going to make our difference, and we're going to actually come out ahead. So for instance, if you have pull in or push out situations where perhaps you don't need substitutes, or where we have these vacancies that are not actually filled with an actual body per se, again, that's where we will start to make headway to offset the teachers. If we fall back into that same habit of it's just a nice to have, then absolutely we run the very real risk of overextending ourselves in our budget one more year, one more time.
Thank you, Carlene. All right. Thank you. Commissioner Powell?
Thank you. This is another question for our superintendent. I noticed, and it's very tangential to the conversation at hand, but I apologize, but we often can't ask the questions we really want to during our business meetings. Regarding returning to in-person learning, this is kind of prompted by the same onboard newspaper that Vice President Elliott mentioned. The cover article was, reimagining public education. And I know that you're still meeting with the superintendents across the county, right?
Correct.
one of the ongoing issues for years has been the conversation about whether high schools shouldn't be starting later and elementary schools starting earlier. And even in the remote learning environment, the elementary schools are starting at 8:30 and how's it going? 8 o'clock?
No.
Oh, tell me
Secondary,
what, go ahead.
secondary starts at 8:30 and elementary starts at 9.
So that's the kind of, the research shows that the secondary should be the one starting later, not, and so even in this, in the scenario where logistically it would be easier to flip because we don't have after school sports and what have you, we're still following this antiquated model. Is it possible to begin the conversation, especially with other superintendents across the county, about flipping that so that our secondary students are able to start later? I know that because of sports, it has to be coordinated with other school districts,
Sure.
but you know, there isn't a better time to be having this conversation than when we're looking at restarting everything. And I can't for the life of me understand why this is such a hard thing to change.
Certainly, there are a couple things. First and foremost, this conversation was held by Monroe County superintendents probably about 1.5 years or so ago, because as you know, Webster Central School District actually did make this move. And they are the only district at this time, to my knowledge, that has moved in that direction. And the superintendent, Carmine, has said how beneficial it was. We had conversations and we received information from pediatricians and psychologists, et cetera. So it's not that the conversation has been held. I think it's a matter of, is that a conversation that we want to start having in the Rochester City School District? I will say some of the issues that were discussed were the following. One, as you mentioned, Commissioner Powell, athletics certainly is problematic, right? As far as trying to schedule that. And I have not circled back to see how Webster is doing that. But that's one thing. Another thing that was also problematic, I know in Webster, is the childcare issues that were needed for particularly teachers, but others who needed that early morning support before school. And so that was, I know, an issue that they were maneuvering through. But when you do look at the research, it's very clear that our older students need to have that extra time, that their brains function better and the learning is stronger when they have a later start, and that our younger students do. That's not, I hate when I do that. Learn better, and there's just lots of benefits, but I just don't know the extent to what those conversations, how they, if and when and how they've been held. But I've been very active, and I actually did start that study when I was in Brockport, and we were looking at that and entertaining that.
Thank you, Dr. Myers-Small.
Sure.
Dr. Jallow?
Yes, good evening. I wanted to go back to the conversation about substitutes a little bit to your question, Commissioner Elliott. And I just want to caution the board against using the reopening plan that we have established here in this district, a virtual design as a strategy for reducing your substitute costs. A virtual model is not going to solve your over expenditures on that particular budget item for substitutes, right? What should happen is kind of to what Commissioner Powell is saying around reimagining A, how you use substitutes and when you use substitutes, and B, how and when you monitor. If you have put in your budget line $10 million for substitutes, then everybody in the system needs to understand you only have $10 million for substitutes. And perhaps you should try to spend a little less than $10 million And that's not what's happening. If you say that you're spending a certain amount, every month you should know how close you're getting to that amount. So you know when you're approaching being over your budgeted amount for the substitutes. And I think that that's something that has to be included. And as it relates to reimagining, I mean, looking at all the meetings that special ed has for CSC and annuals and all those meetings, you hire substitutes to cover teachers to attend those meetings. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I'm just saying you might want to reimagine even just that one area as to how you use substitutes. But I think it's the biggest thing that can be done is for everybody to understand just how much money does everybody have to spend on substitutes and stick to that amount and not go over it.
And Dr. Joe, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm good.
Yeah, I was going to say that point is very well taken, but I was looking at it hoping for some windfall, but not as a strategy per se, but that during this time there may be some windfall is what I was hoping. You know, that we had some kind of reprieve during this particular circumstance. So certainly we cannot use it as a strategy. But I was thinking that, you know, there may have been some windfall here. That's what I was
There's windfalls, and then we found little windfalls throughout the district, you know, actually over the last couple of weeks. But I think at some point administration and the board have to come together and say, okay, when we see $5, and I'm just making it up, what do you want to spend it on first? Do you want to pay off your debts first? Do you want to reestablish your reserve first? Do you want to hire, you know, you have to kind of establish when we do have these windfalls, what do you want administration to address first, then second, then third, and fourth? I think that's an important conversation to have at some point as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Commissioner Adams?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that when you start looking at research, please look at all of it, because I know research that states that early in the morning for the kids, for the young kids, don't work. I know that from the research that the parents did from being on a school-based planning. My kids' school did that for quite a few years. And so when the bus would come, they wouldn't even be woke to get off the bus. They would be so tired. And so there's a lot of research that parents have done, and that's just as important as any other research they did in Stanton University or wherever. So I just, before we head down that direction, I would like us to look at all of the research in reference to getting them kids up early, because my kids were so personally, not just my kids, that whole school. The kids sleeping on the bus on the way home. They don't have time for after school. They're so exhausted. So when we start talking about looking at different start times, I want us to make sure that we look at it all the research. I'm good. That's all.
Yeah, you know, we have, it's been a practice in this district that because we are all real professional, and I say that loosely, that we have looked at professional research as opposed to, or at the, I think some instances at the neglect of the research that the parents or the experiences of the parents. And I believe, Commissioner Adams, that we have to look at those, in my view, equally as we look at the research that's done in the university. So I support you there 100%. So are there any other questions about Steve's presentation?
Vice President Elliott, I just realized that in listening to Commissioner LeBron, I didn't respond to an early point that she made that I do feel like I want to address with respect to the resolution that's going forward on September 24th with respect to the Bente unit employees. Those are not what we're bringing forward for you are actual layoff numbers. The 49 school safety officers, we're bringing the names of people who are going to be placed onto a Pell. As I said, there are more positions that are being closed down temporarily, but those are, there were vacancies. But with respect to your point about the other positions, the point's well taken. This is how we view things in the HR world, and we don't always get to see how other people see them. But for us, an FTE is the same as a vacancy because it just represents a dollar tagged to be allocated to a position. So
Commissioner LeBron, do you hear what Steve is saying? Okay, yeah, I think she's on another. She's on another call or something, Steve. So
I'm sorry, Steve. My mom just called. She never calls. I had to take it. You know what's going on. So
No, it's fine. Well, so for the rest of the board, just so that's what I understand the question, and should this data be presented again, I'll certainly pass along to my successor, who can present it to you all in a different format. But for 2 nights from now, the names that you see on the board resolution packet are actual names for reductions, and the numbers are true to that. Although the vacancies being closed are significantly larger than the number of names that are presented to you.
okay, thank you, Steve. Commissioner Powell.
I just want to call out, while it's relevant right now, Commissioner Elliott, you are doing a fantastic job facilitating this meeting. Just the way you circle back to make sure the relevant parties got what they needed. I'm so impressed, and I just wanted to call that out. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Thank you so very much, Commissioner Powell. Thank you, my colleagues. I appreciate that. See, I'm getting better. See, so Commissioner LeBron, there's hope.
there's nothing wrong with Commissioner LeBron. Let me just put that out there in the way I deal with some of y'all. Not all, but some of y'all.
Mr. President, that concludes the meeting. Do I need to take a vote to end the meeting?
No, I mean, you could.
I just turned the gavel back over to you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you very much, everybody.
I wanted to, before we transition to our next committee meeting, I wanted to thank Steve, and I know that Leslie has done that, but on behalf of the board, thank Steve for his work. He spoke briefly about his successor, but in the meantime, he has really held it down and done a really good job. And that's a good way for me to segue into also complimenting Vice President Elliott. You know, I got to be honest, Cynthia, I had my times where I was wondering whether having an HR committee was even really necessary. I was not always convinced that this was a good idea, but today was a great example of why a committee like this is very helpful, because what we got today was sort of a view into the forest from 1,000 feet. And we got to see what the administration is doing in terms of planning and looking into the future, as well as in looking back. And that, I don't think, of course, we never had COVID before where we needed that kind of presentation, but actually we probably did. And I don't think we ever have had that kind of presentation. So kudos to you for many years. You know, you were out there telling people, we got to have an HR committee. We got to have an HR committee. And I was not one of those ones that was convinced that was necessary. But today really made it clear, particularly in a crisis like this, why that, and not just COVID, but the financial crisis that we have, which really makes it clear why that kind of comprehensive, detached from crises analysis of where you're at is really critical. So,
Mr. President, let me just add on
sure.
This is the kind of work that I wanted to do for the HR committee. I know that there was concerns about, you know, we would try to hire people. I know historically that's been some of the concerns of, you know, we want to hire people and, you know, we want to tell HR what to do. No, that wasn't my intent at all. It was, this is an example of that we need to have this sort of high level kind of oversight so that, you know, as we make our decisions in terms of governance, you know, we have the information. So thank you all very much.
Yep.
So that's an example of what I wanted to do.
Yep, absolutely. So thank you for that leadership, not only today, but just getting us to this point where we can have this kind of dialogue. So really appreciate it. All right, Commissioner Adams, you're up next. You have the gavel. It's Committee on Intergovernmental Relations.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the CIGR committee. Since I'm not just talking to the people on the screen who are basically the choir, I'm talking to the public here. We're going to go over what the CIGR committee is. So, because there's a lot of jargon that's kind of blurry. And we won't do this every committee, but we're going to do it today. The purpose of the Community and Intergovernmental Relations Committee is twofold: to increase public awareness of the Board of Education and the ways in which board oversight and decision-making improve student performance and achievement in the district. A lot of jargon there. 2, to facilitate the board's working relationships with stakeholders to advance district interests. Stakeholders include students, parents, grandparents, and guardians, members of the Rochester community, including the business community, Rochester City School District staff, and local, state, and nationally elected officials, lobbyists, and school board organizations. The objectives of the CIGR committee is to educate stakeholders on the role of the Board of Education and ways in which oversight and decision-making are conducted. 2, educate stakeholders on the priorities and initiatives of the Board of Education in the district. Ensure district information and district decisions are communicated to stakeholders. Stay attuned to stakeholder issues and concerns so that board members represent the views, interests, and values of all stakeholders when making policy, exercising fiscal responsibility, or overseeing the superintendent, and enhance the role of stakeholders by inviting stakeholders to participate in board meetings, committee meetings, budget hearings, forums, and town halls. I will be coming back to that point there. Develop with superintendent and stakeholders annual legislative agenda. Review and make recommendations to the board on proposed legislations affecting the board, RCSD, or students, as well as legal cases that may impact RCSD, CFE, which is a campaign for fiscal equity. And review all board resolutions pertaining to board positions, appropriate contracts, and with stakeholders, advocate on behalf of the board and the RCSD. Work to build and maintain relationships with local, state, and national elected officials. March on Albany. Serve as conduit with City Hall and work closely with board to ensure input on City Hall decisions that may impact RCSD. No matter how kind of relationship we have with the City Hall, I have to push through that and work it out. Make it happen. That's what I intend to do. But the point that I wanted to get back to the objective where it says to enhance the role of stakeholders. I was specifically speaking about parents. I've been out here in the community speaking with a lot of parents, a lot of you, and you've always said that you wanted to be involved. Yet I still find myself 3 committees short of parent representation. I need you to really be involved. I need you to step up and sign up to be on these committees. You know, I have a parent rep for CIGR, for finance, and for policy, but I need a rep for ESA, audit, and HR. And I'm asking you to please put a little bit, I know your plate is full, but get a bigger plate and step up. Step up. That's what I need you to do. Tonight, we have the director of the OPE here to present some information to us. Khadijah, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me to this meeting just to give an update of our parent groups. I also share the same sentiment and just working with some of these parent groups and getting that representation to the table. And also we'll take this opportunity to say, you know, we need parents on these parent groups. And the reason being is, you know, these are district level parent groups where the engagement will be, you know, particularly at the decision-making tables and having that direct access and collaboration with the board as well as the superintendent. So I'll just start out with our Parent Advisory Council group and where we are with that as of today. The group was meeting bi-weekly to revise the bylaws and took a break to attend to family matters and concerns that came up when COVID hit. Since starting back up, this group of parents have completed the revision of the bylaws to include recommendations that were made in the DE report. They have been sent to the legal department for review, next steps, creation and submission of a resolution for board approval, as well as elections that will take place with this group. The group is set to meet every third Wednesday of the month. However, the next meeting is going to be September 28th, which is a Monday, to further discuss elections, the goals for this group, and as you mentioned, Commissioner Adams, the recruitment measures for district-wide representation. That's a district-wide parent group as well, and we want to see more members be a part of that group. So as it stands, there has been probably a dedicated 6 to 8 parents that have showed up weekly to revise the bylaws, and meeting, tirelessly bi-weekly to do so. But we're very happy with where they are and that progress that has been made with that group, restructuring that group. The next parent group is the Bilingual Education Council, which meets every second Tuesday of the month. This month, the meeting was held at Baden Street Art Center. Their meetings are well attended, but we're always, looking to recruit additional parents to that group as well. They have been working closely with iBureau to ensure that parents and families' basic needs are met, such as food, clothing, just dealing with, any housing concerns. Myrna and iBureau have also been helping parents with desks for students to assist with a structured environment for remote learning. Myrna will stay as the president, and Julie will be the vice president for 1 more year. And that was just for consistency purposes and the transition with us doing remote learning and what that will look like. During the last meeting, parents requested training on how to access Rock Connect and Parent Portal to check student assignments and progress. So OPE will be working with BEC and the Dome Department to schedule that training. And that has been something that has been requested amongst our parents across the board. So OPE is also working with our IT departments to bring those trainings as well. So the next group is our Special Education Council, Cpac. I received notice today from Cheryl Carlton that the previous president, Zyra, has stepped down as president. So they are actually meeting this evening to just discuss structure, policies, and procedures moving forward. They do have a new Facebook page, which is at RCSD Cpac, SEPAC. They also have a new email, and that email is rcsdcpac@gmail.com. Cpac did have their first meeting last week, Monday, and they meet every second Monday of the month. And lastly, just with Cpac, before COVID, Keisha Morgan, our Chief of Special Education, was working on Cpac becoming board sanctioned. So I just followed up with the legal department as to where that was, and we'll be working in the next coming weeks with the special education department to see that through. And then our last parent group is MPAC, which is our Multilingual Parent Advisory Council. And this was a recommendation that came out of the DE report. So last year they started to meet, with the last meeting being March 3rd, right before COVID. They are looking to start meetings again in October. However, Zoom meetings are kind of challenging with this group due to the technology barriers. But Dome Department they also work with this Parent Advisory Council. So they are trying to figure out whether to do, half on Zoom and half in person. That was something that we also offered for our PAC group. And that seemed to work well with just being able to have, COVID or CDC recommendations and social distancing with some parents in the building, and then other parents that could and was comfortable with utilizing technology to participate in that manner. When they were previously meeting, the meetings took place at the Maplewood Y, which we know has closed. And then also at Refugees Helping Refugees. So they hosted the afternoon meetings, and then the YMCA hosted the evening meetings. So the next meeting coming up, this group will also be discussing opportunities for the goals of the group, parent rights, school choice, graduation requirements, seal of biliteracy, and lastly, the need for parental participation. So like I said, my sentiments are the exact of Commissioner Adams with needing parent representation to be on these parent groups. And I know it also takes a degree of relationship building and just kind of changing the way that we do things, but we're in it for the long haul. And I think even the opportunity with COVID, although it creates some barriers, it also creates some opportunities to reach more parents by technology. And whether we do return in person, the recommendation, at least from Office of Parent Engagement, was to continue to offer that dual, platform in person as well as Zoom meetings. And that is all I have.
All right. Since people want to throw around compliments, I want to throw one to you, Khadijah. Kudos to you. You've been just a good help to me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Also, I'd like to mention that we've been planning on working together on the Family Engagement Day forum that we're going to have this year.
Commissioner Adams?
Yes.
It looks like there's some questions regarding the Khadijah's presentation really quickly.
Okay. Oh, you know what? There is. I'm not sure which one was first.
Commissioner Powell.
Okay, Commissioner Powell.
Thank you. My question was regarding the Parent Advisory Council. Two things. You said that they've reworked the bylaws and that they're either ready to send to legal or been sent to legal pending prior to board resolution to ratify. I sure don't want to be ratifying something I don't see well before the day of the meeting. And I don't imagine that legal is going to actually be in a position to change or recommend changes. So can you see to it that the board receives a copy of this proposed bylaws?
Absolutely.
Okay, and the second is the officer slate. You suggested that there was a desire to have prior president carry forward for continuity's sake. If this parent no longer has children in the schools, I don't care about continuity. We worked really hard to be clear as a board that we're talking about current parents. And maybe you can remind us the credentials of this parent. I can't recall if this parent is the same parent whose kids have subsequently graduated out of the system.
Commissioner Powell, which parent group are you referencing?
District Parent Advisory Council.
The PAC?
Yeah.
So there are no previous PAC members within this new group. All the members that are currently in this group have kids that are in the district enrolled now.
Okay, was I mixing up your report with different group then?
It
You said-
possibly either been B, C, or Cpac.
Thank you.
No problem.
Commissioner Elliott, Vice President Elliott.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. I just had a question reference to the meetings. Occasionally, I would attend the Bilingual Council and some of the other PAC. Are those meetings available to us via Zoom?
Sure, I can make sure that you guys have the links to participate. That's no problem.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so at this time,
Commissioner LeBron, Commissioner Adams.
Hi, Ms. Adams.
Commissioner LeBron had a hand up.
yeah. Oh, there's a couple hands up. Go ahead, Commissioner LeBron.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. So just two quick things, I guess. For me, I do want to commend you, Khadijah, for the work that you have reported out today. It's been a long battle, and I say battle for me primarily because there have been some issues that have been repeatedly mentioned from this board and our concerns around what had occurred 2 years ago and continued with the parent groups. And so this is like the first time I feel like you're reporting some stabilization and some new leadership and vision with the parents and a real focus for all of us collectively as a district to support these parent groups moving forward. So I thank you for that work. I just, well, and two more points. One, I do want to ask about the role of language access and accessibility to all of these things that we do, and what role that the Office of Parent Engagement might play into that piece. And I mean, in terms of, I know that we have a multi-language parent group that was also being cultivated a few months back prior to COVID. But just ensuring that we are presenting the same opportunities in multiple languages. So that's one. And two, a plea to what Commissioner Adams also mentioned earlier around parents who are watching this, and parents who also are representative of the students that we serve. So I definitely have to add that because, you know, although we do have a parent rep joining the finance team, I would love to have a parent that is representative of 90% of our student population. And so that is my plea. We are 90% a district of Black and Brown students. And so to our Black and Brown parents, we need you. And whatever supports that you might feel like you need, I know for myself, if you join finance, I will personally work with whoever to get them up to speed and have a level of understanding. Certainly not have you just there and feeling like you don't know what's going on. So I just want to throw that additional supports out there if you join, because I am still looking for one more person for finance. But again, I want people that represent Black and Brown parents to join these committees, but particularly finance. But back to the question, Khadijah, any thoughts around the roles that the Office of Parent Engagement will work with around language access to this information?
Deputy Superintendent Martinez Davis actually yesterday about this. So we'll be working together to see that we make sure that we're always attentive to the other languages that we do have in addition to our Spanish speaking families. So specifically for the Multilingual Parent Advisory Council, we made sure that we had devices that would actually translate, because there's actually I want to say four to five different languages alone within that group. So we had the access to the technology that would translate in their languages, in addition to translators if they were available in person to participate in those meetings. So if there is that concern that parents have as far as a language barrier goes, I would direct them to contact Office of Parent Engagement so that we can make sure we're presenting in the languages that they're speaking.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, President White, you're up next.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Really briefly to follow up on what Vice President Elliott said, Ms. Mohammed, at one point in the PAC's history, they would set aside the time for board members to visit. They'd actually set aside some time on their agenda. I forgot whether it was every other month or quarterly or something like that. I don't know if you or the new leadership there would consider that, but I found that I went to a lot of meetings, but I made it a point to attend those pre-scheduled meetings, and they were sort of open-ended sessions where they could ask board members any questions that they had. So I'd ask that you take that to the leadership team as a viable option for making sure that when we came to those meetings, that there were certain meetings that we came to that were especially productive because the time was set aside for us to answer any and all questions they might have. But you don't have to respond to that, but I'd ask that you maybe consider that and share that with your bosses, and then of course share that with the new leadership. Thank you.
I will definitely respond because I think that is something that the parent group themselves, the members want to ensure. So I think they will be, agreeable to setting aside that time. And again, just making sure that you guys have the Zoom links to attend when you're able to, in addition to that specific time set aside.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Dr. Myers-Small.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Two things. I know Vice President Elliott asked about the BEC. They only meet in person, and their meetings are during board meetings. So it makes it difficult for us to attend. I did reach out, and it's our hope that at least for a few of the meetings that they can move them to a Wednesday. So both Deputy Martinez Davis and I can attend, because that is important for them to see us there. So I just wanted to make sure you were aware that they only have in-person meetings. And then the second thing, I'm not sure if the commissioners know or the public, but Khadijah did graduate from the Rochester City School District. She graduated from Wilson Magnet High School, and it's just, again, an honor to see her contributing back to our school community. I've known her a very long time. I was actually her high school counselor. So I just wanted to add my thanks to know that one of our alumni are back and serving our district so passionately and advocating on behalf of the needs of parents and caregivers. So shout out to Khadijah.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Okay, and with that, I'm going to ask the board members to approve the minutes from the last CIGR committee meeting on June 23rd, 2020. Can I get a motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Commissioner Adams, I would just note.
Let me ask the secretary. Did she record that?
She did.
Okay, she did. And so with that, unless it's very important, I was going to pass you the gavel, President White.
Did you want to talk about the Family Engagement Day, Commissioner Adams?
I think he did.
So since we're still in the planning, we actually have another meeting coming up this Friday. I had supported not reporting out partial information. I wanted to wait until after Friday, maybe at the next meeting when I could give them a complete information, that I would do it then.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, I caught the gavel. Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Thank you, Ms. Mohammed, for providing us that update. It is refreshing to see that that office is now stabilized and providing us good information and supporting Commissioner Adams in his effort as chair of that committee. I also want to thank you, Commissioner Adams. Your plea, your direct and unequivocal plea to people to make their plates bigger. I like that. I'll have to steal that. I like that phrase. Is a good one. And I know Khadijah, Ms. Mohammed supported you in that. So I hope people heard your plea and will some will take you up on that offer, because we really do need folks' support. And we all have gotten bigger plates because the challenges have been bigger. So thank you for sharing that. And again, if you see me steal that in a speech or an editorial, hey, it's just too good to not use it again. So thank you for that. That would lead us to the point where we're about to go into executive session. And I want to thank everybody who chaired, Vice President Elliott, Commissioner Adams, of course, our clerk, for getting us through the agenda effectively and efficiently at 7:08. We're way ahead of schedule, but I don't think anything was slighted or put aside. I do want to take one more minute to recognize, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Jaquela Young and Jarvis Alexander, two students whose potential, sadly, we won't see, but we can do things to ensure that other students get to see their full potential. And as we, again, turn our thoughts to them, let's also remember that there are loved ones, family members, and staff members who we all work with at East and UPrep. One of our own, Walter Larkin, a graduate as well of the district, is serving his community over at UPrep. And a lot of other good folks are doing that. So again, as we close out this meeting, let us turn our thoughts to those folks, family members, staff members who are suffering this loss along with the rest of us. So on that note, can I get a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing matters related to the appointment of a particular person? We also have a closed session with our general counsel. Is there a motion, Commissioner LeBron?
Yep.
And moved by Commissioner Brown. Is there a second? I think I heard Vice President Elliott. All those in favor of going into executive session indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Ladies and gentlemen, I do not believe, unless the clerk corrects me, we will be coming back out of executive session. So on behalf of the board, we wish that you have a safe and happy night. Good night, everybody.